Thanks also to José Diego Mantecamper for your presentation. We have so many good reasons to implement STEM4youth modules, also some constraints that we need to overcome. I kindly invite Wendley Sedlers and Federico Biaggi to come back to the stage, but also Jose, please stay here because now it's time to discuss with all our speakers and also to collect questions from the audience. I would like to remind you that also many of the contents that we have discussed and presented today are here in this booklet that you have received at the very outset at the reception desk. So, of course, maybe the presentation, the data will be provided later on the website, but the summary and insights from the final conference speakers are here in this booklet. So, please have a chair. I will find a place also for me. Is there any comments from the audience, or also questions, asking for more clarification, more data, also to comment something that has been already presented from Wendy, Federico, and Jose? Maybe I suppose there is a microphone.
Yes, there is a microphone. I have one question, because you did a lot of work and you have, for example, recommendations and good ideas, and now this is all done to change the education. So when you bring the results, for example, the teachers, how they react, because maybe it's something they knew because they are after pedagogical studies, or it's like, wow, thank you, it was exactly what we are waiting, thank you, we are changing, or it's like, we don't have time to do this. So what's the next step when you take the results to the teachers, how they react and what they do with this?
To whom is the question?
This project,
Who was asking you? I don't know.
so who? The question is for whom of the speakers?
Really to all of this,
to
because
all. Okay.
yeah.
Who will be the first?
You first?
Okay, our experience is that it's very difficult to engage teachers in these activities or in this methodology because it requires a lot of time and effort, and they are using their spare time to think about the activities, to work with the student outside of the classroom, etc. But I've been working for almost 5 years now with different projects, not only STEM4youth, and what I'm experiencing is that every teacher who starts in one of our projects continues. And it's like, you know, they get very motivated by especially coming to events. For example, today 4 teachers and 8 students are coming from a region in Spain called Cantabria, and they are coming to present here their projects. This experience is very stimulating for them because they have been working a lot, especially the students, on preparing the activities and everything, and now they are going to see results at the end of this hard work. So that's why we are like creating like a community of the teachers that are joining the project every year, and they continue with us all the time. They cannot leave this kind of methodology. And some of them, for example, I remember one of them told me this year, "Oh, Jose, I'm very worried. This year I don't have students to work with these activities because I didn't find anyone." But I say, "Don't worry, you will find them." And I mean, the teacher was worried because he wanted to involve the students, and they finally, the students got involved in the project. I mean, so. Yeah, they never leave the project. But I have a student that I have teachers that I cannot involve them initially into the project because they refuse to participate from the beginning. But if they participate, they continue.
You have occasion to interact directly to school teachers to present this kind of data?
Not this type of data, in the sense that this is a research that it's done basically for the Directorate General Education and Culture, so the GEAC, because they asked us to do this study. So it's not directed to teachers, but there are implications. First is try to make sure that teachers are well prepared, well motivated, well paid. It's not there, but it's implicitly there. I mean, there is a correlation between the level of knowledge or skills and competences students have and how well selected and paid teachers are. Canada is a very good example of this. So unless we start putting money, serious money, but money is not enough. We know that there is also a lot of evidence that not just spending is not enough. You have to form teachers in a proper way. You have to support their personal and career development through their life. And you have to make sure that they are motivated. And this is a big issue, especially in Europe, especially in southern countries in which the salaries of teachers are not particularly high. There are other projects which work more directly with schools. So a part of my unit is doing what is called competence frameworks. So they design competence framework, especially for digital competence, entrepreneurial competences, learning to learn. And then there is a project, it's called Selfie, you might have heard about it, and it's basically how schools rate their self-efficacy in terms of digital competences. And so you have an immediate way of checking where do I stand relative to other schools with the average of the country, and then what should I do to improve them. From a scientific perspective, all I can add is, whatever you have done and whatever can be done in the future, it would be very interesting to do some serious scientific evaluation of the impact of these measures. So from this project, what I take is, so you have some pilots, some ideas. Let's see if you can have a framework that can be proposed to more schools, collect evidence, serious evidence, which means you have a treatment group, a school which has been treated, and a control group, a school which has not been treated, has not been selected for this type of, and then you compare the results and see whether it works. It works not in the 3 months following the experiment, but it works in leaving a trace for the next years, that's also important. Because everything, an experiment is exciting by itself, but how long does the excitement last? That's a very important question, I think.
Yeah, we've done a project with primary schools, so 5 to 11-year-olds, and the teachers there in the UK certainly have very little confidence in science. And as you said, I think a lot of research suggests that gender stereotypes start to happen quite a lot in primary school. And in the UK anyway, most primary school teachers are female. Sometimes they bring in a male maths teacher or science teacher, which makes it worse. We did a controlled trial with Oxford Brookes University on some training for primary science teachers, where we did one class and the other class didn't get the intervention over a period of time. And it did have an effect on achievement, and particularly on the girls, and particularly on those from a low socioeconomic background. But mostly that was about changing the confidence of the teachers to teach science when they didn't know it themselves at a high level. And it was about thinking skills. It was about teaching. It was called Thinking, Doing, Talking Science. It was about conversational problem-solving skills, really. So it was about getting them to think they didn't have to know all the science to teach scientific skills. So it was a different approach, and that was a small pilot, had an effect in one region, in Oxford, and now they've tried to roll it out to other regions of the UK, and we're just waiting to get the data back on whether that has also been effective. But there will be some results soon if you want to look up that project. But that was primary science teachers.
Can we have the microphone here?
So, first of all, thank you very much to all speakers for these very insightful presentations. I would like to ask specifically to Federico from JRC a question. So, we saw from your presentation that enjoying science is a very important marker in order to, let's say, forecast whether students will take up a STEM career in future. I think also STEM4youth actually tried to convey a bit of this. So right now, we know this, how to implement this in policies, because I think it's not so easy to implement the fact that STEM teaching has to be, funny, involving and so on and so forth in a policy. I mean, how do you structure it?
That's a very, very difficult question to answer, and I guess I'm not even the best person to do that, in the sense that this is something that a policy DG should. I can give you an example. My daughter started science, she's 13, with a new professor, so different from last year, and she was absolutely excited. She loved it, and then after a month the school changed the teacher and went back to the previous one, and now she doesn't like it anymore. And she's the same person with the same attitudes. What has happened is that they went from a good teacher to a not so good teacher. So how do you implement this? I think that, sure, you have to have some infrastructure. If you don't have a science lab at school, well, then you're extremely limited in the things you can do. I would say that working on the teachers is the most important aspect. Now, if you have pilots, if you have experiments, things that can be inspirational, I'm sure that that would work. At the same time, I don't think that, certainly not the European Commission cannot certainly go and say, you schools have to do this, because that's out of reach. But you can show things that work. And that's what I would suggest. Show things that work, and possibly even show things that do not work, because you learn a lot from mistakes as well. I don't know if anyone wants to say more. But yeah.
I agree with you.
Other questions or comments? So maybe talking about, again, educational policies. We have seen from Federico's presentation that educational policies impact on career plans. I don't know if also on career choices. Maybe we can have different data. I don't know if you have something to add on this. And this regardless of socioeconomic and familiar context. So this means that educational policy have a value, they are very relevant in this context. So what kind of educational policy at European level, at local level, we need some alignments between and among all the actors involved in the educational system. Do you have some experience idea about this? What kind of educational policy do we really need to foster STEM education? And this is for
I
all
reply as a citizen of the European Union, not as a representative of the Commission, because this is an area where the Commission does not have strong powers, basically. So the powers are in the member states. So what the Commission can do is gather data and compare countries, as I said, show things that work. But it really does not have much power into the implementation of this. Now, as a citizen or as a researchers, we know that there are many ways. For instance, you mentioned before the 8 key competences that the Commission has. So basically the idea is that to be a citizens of the new era, new age, and to be fully participating to education, work and life, you need to be confident or competent in these 8 competences, okay? And actually some of them have been defined in my unit by my colleagues. So we're quite familiar. But then the real issue is, how do you implement them? To me, that's the key question, because if we define them, okay, we've gone one step further, for sure. But then the next step is, how do I make sure that children have this? And I don't think there is one solution for this. In fact, I would say that there are many solutions, many experiments out there. Some of them work better, some work less. What my unit, and so now I'm going back to the institutional role, my unit is actually trying to put together a catalog of suggestions for schools, but the catalog is going to be just a catalog and a suggestion. So there are lots of things happening out there. So if you look, I mean, they are school-specific, region-specific, country-specific, so there are lots of experiments in this, and I think it's good in the sense that it's only through this experimentation that you will find out what works. If I had the power, what I would do, which I don't have, I would clearly put together as much evidence as I can on what works and for whom, because that's also important. And that's the service I would like to give to the public of Europe, not just based on scientific evidence, and so a mix of case studies, a mix of hard evidence, like experiments, what works. For instance, something that is proven to be quite successful, and then I'll stop, I don't want to take too much of your time, but basically what has happened is that there is an issue in Europe and in the world, that is, if you are from a high social status, your family is from a high social status, it's much more likely that you will go to tertiary education, okay? It's huge evidence that this is happening. Now, this could be due to credit constraints, meaning your family cannot support you through school, it's too expensive. Or it could be due to the fact that you don't really perceive, because in your cultural environment it's not perceived, the value that there is in going to tertiary education in terms of opportunities, benefits, and so on. So there are experiments going on in Europe done by very serious researchers that have tried to inform, so purely inform, the family, the teacher, and the students of the gains that you might have by going through tertiary education. And the results are really interesting. So it makes a huge difference. And this is zero cost. You don't need to put any money in this. You just, it's sufficient to inform. And that can change the destiny of people. To me, that's a very, policy effective way of going about this. I don't know if I managed to reply.
And a question also for Jose, because also STEM4youth have collected data, evidences about the effectiveness of this kind of approaches of informal education and formal education. But as you have presented, there are so many constraints, time, resources for school teachers. So do you have a rough idea about how to sort it out, this kind of constraints? Maybe it's a structural problem of the educational system, so we need to think about a joint effort to overcome this kind of problems. Or maybe, I don't know if you have your personal idea according to your experience during this project and other experiences that you had in the course of your life.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't like to say that there is a problem in the educational system. I mean, the educational system, they are designed or constructed in a certain way, and implementing these methodologies, these new methodologies, is very difficult because, they are against their own systems. I mean, we will have to change the whole systems to start working like that. Just not only the facilities of the schools, but also the teachers' qualification or training. I mean, there are many constraints. And to be honest, for example, talking about the STEM methodology, I think is is an useful methodology, but I think there are other methodologies that they are also useful. I mean, I wouldn't like to just to highlight one of them. We are talking about STEM, but I mean, not everything has to be STEM education. I think can be, you know, I think a balance of having. Also, I think there are no good or bad teachers. I mean, a bad teacher can, for example, a bad teacher can motivate you in some ways. For example, I remember some of teachers that I consider in my career many years ago that they were very bad teachers at that point. And now I think many years later that maybe they were not too bad because they were teaching me different things. I mean, education is a very difficult field, and teaching and learning is a very difficult job. And I wouldn't give, you know, I wouldn't assert about any methodology or any way of teaching or learning.
A question from Alessandro, and also.
Yeah, thanks. I have a quick question for Wendy because I know we have a lot of several teachers here, and most of them are female. So I want to talk briefly about. I want to ask you if do you have some suggestion from them? Maybe it is not correct to consider them as a role model, but the fact is that they are the main screen between students and STEM education, and that's a fact. So I know them, not several of them personally, and I would like to ask you if you have some suggestion for them.
So was the question, are they good role models, or that they are good role models?
Yeah, or maybe trying some way that they are not thinking yet to be some good role model with their students.
Yeah. Well, obviously, just having a female science teacher is a really helpful start. But I think tips for that, I think it's about sharing how you feel about science as much as sharing the facts and the exam techniques. And I'm sure you do. I think if you are able to teach your own science that you love, and that comes across, that is what people remember. And certainly in the UK, most people who do higher level physics at school are not taught by a physicist who's done a physics degree. And so people, I think, can teach the content really fine, but they don't get excited by it. And I think if you're a role model to students, they pick up very quickly whether you personally think this is interesting and useful or not, or if you're just teaching it. And so I think you have to be prepared to talk about your feelings about the science and try and tap in to the humanitarian needs, like in your introduction about how the future, whichever way it goes, is going to involve scientific progress. And there is some research does back up the theory that girls are more switched on to science if it has a humanitarian goal. And so it isn't so much maybe about a good job and good pay and good salary. It's about, can my work make a difference to the world or the planet or to people? And this is why obviously in health jobs, more girls will, this is what the research suggests, more girls see the direct benefit to society of that, and they see it less, particularly in physics and engineering. So it's making that connection. I think my tip would be is trying to make those connections between where physics and engineering, physics is the hardest, I think, sometimes seems very abstract. How can it connect to helping people and helping the planet and helping the world and not be seen as just a remote, distant thing?
Perhaps another question over there. I saw an hand.
Well, first of all, I don't speak English very well. I'm just learning to speak. So, but I would like to ask a question about the the generous gap, the gap between girls and boys learning STEM. And in my high school, in every project we are making, only are girls on it, only girls. Perhaps one boy or two boys, but usually these boys leave the projects and only girls stay in. Thank you. This is my student. She speaks English very much more better than me. Well, anyway, and don't you think you should actualize your dates about this question? Because I think the change about this issue is now. It's changing today. Thank you.
So, I couldn't hear very well, but I could not hear very well because of the noise. I don't know. I don't hear very well. But so you say that in your school, your projects basically only girls go. So exactly the contrary of what I kind of just shown.
I was working during 2 years. It is not a special age.
Okay, so
all my experience is that.
my first question would be how many girls you have in your class? Have? So it's not a statistical issue.
They are free to join into the projects, but only girls can work in STEM projects.
Okay, so the data I presented is based on PISA. I mean, I probably don't want to enter into the details, but it's a very sophisticated data collection exercise where you basically select some schools in a country, and then within the schools you select some classes, and then within some classes you select some students, so that this selection is made so that at the end you roughly, I mean, you should be having a sample that is representative of the country, which does not mean that within the country there are lots of differences. In fact, if you go to regional data, and we did a study on Spain and Italy, you can see, not on STEM, but on the PISA outcomes, which is the measure of competences, you can see that there are huge differences. For instance, Castilla-La Mancha comes top level in Spain, and Andalusia and Extremadura at the bottom. Same in Italy. Trentino is at the level of Finland, Sicily is together with Andalusia. So there is a lot of variation within the region and also within the school. So what I can say, I'm glad that in your case it didn't work, but on average it does work. On average it does work that the professional expectations, which is not the same as participating to an experiment. No, participating to an experiment might be driven by the fact that maybe that teacher is really good, is treating me well, it's an interesting project, my friends go there. I don't know, there are many, I don't know what the drivers are, but in terms of job expectations, I think that a lot more issues come in, which have related to where I see myself in the future, based on my family background, who my father is, who my mother is, what are they doing, what's the family business like. So it's much more complex than just participation I think, to an experiment.
No further questions or comments from the audience? Oh, another question there.
It's a commentary, not a question. Before you were speaking about the main actors in learning, I think the main actors are the students. The teacher should be only a guide to making a continuous assessment. Sorry, I was saying that the students are the main actors in the learning, and teachers should be only a guide. We should give them the power. Ask them, how do you want to learn? Do you prefer STEM methods, or you prefer classic, traditional place with lessons and exams. I'm sure they are answering the first option. That's all. Thank you.
I think we had some issue to listen to this, to the speaker, to the audience, if it was a question or a comment on the, just a comment. Okay, so an experience from your perspective. Yes, but because there is a connection with the real world, because they are learning by doing, there is something they can remember for a long time because of this real life experience, let's say. Okay, thank you. Other experiences, other comments, other questions?
Can I ask a question to some students? I mean, they can reply in their own language, okay, if they don't feel like they can. They will speak English, okay. Do you notice that your neurons were more activated when you did experiments than when you sat down in the class and listened to the prof? Lo dijo en español. ¿Te parece que tus neuronas han sido movidas más, se han movido más cuando has hecho un experimento o cuando te has sentado y escuchado? So you learn that actually by teaching you learn. It's the best way of learning, by the way, teaching. So the fact that you could design the project in a way that you could participate, it affected your learning, you think? Not only the fact that it's interesting, but also your learning. You think so?
It's also sort of preference. You prefer to be active instead of passive and listen to your teachers and just to be in the classroom and listen to other people's, but you have an active role. Other questions from the panel or from the audience?
Can I just add, because that's exactly how I felt, I think, when I did, and teaching is the best way of learning. I did a physics degree, but it was only when I worked in a science centre, sort of hands-on science centre, and 8-year-olds would come and ask me questions about physics that I had to explain to them, that I realised the degree didn't really equip me necessarily to do that, but the ability to find out for myself did, and that's a skill that you do get, and I think that you do have as a sort of curiosity. And I think if the projects you're doing, sounds like, have the ability to not have an answer, but you have to find the answer, that's such a strong motivator. And the fact you learn by communication sounds like you're destined to be a science communicator, so I can give you a job in a few years' time.
Thank you. I suppose it's time to wrap up also this first part of the final conference of STEM4youth. Now it's time for the lunch break, but I would like to thank once again Wendley Sadler, Federico Biaggi, and José Diego Mantecón for their presentation and for the discussion. So we will come back at 2:15 after the lunch break, so enjoy the lunch.